Okay, this is a quick video today. Just going over one of the basic concepts of scenic stamping as it applies to a lot of the designs from Stampscapes. The designs from Stampscapes are, for the most part, tonal. There's not a lot of linear imagery, okay? So, for a moon, for example, like this stamp right here, quite often a moon image would be traditionally, something like this with some craters on it or whatnot, could be a little shaded on one side or whatnot. And that would be kind of like a moon. But what I've done in the Stampscapes line to define the moon is it's more about the tone around that object, okay? So what you have is kind of this area right here that's made up of negative space. The same thing goes for something like, for example, lightning, okay? Most of the images that I saw back in the day, when I drew this are, lightning bolt would look, something like this, or, you have your traditional lightning bolt like that. But if you were to stamp that out, and this is in a day especially when I drew that, is there weren't any, even things like pigment ink, so you couldn't stamp it, or I think even emboss in something like a white ink, okay? But what I wanted was I wanted a lightning bolt to look more like a bolt of lightning, which would mean that it would be the lightest thing in the sky, the illuminating source of the landscape. So, if there was a bolt of lightning like this, okay, I would darken in the area around it, okay, and that part would stamp out, and the negative space that we'd have remaining, would be, this bolt of lightning like that, okay? So all this would be kind of dark around it, all right? So that very concept of kind of the usage of negative space to define a light source or something that has reflected light in it, like for example, this chapel right here, it's the same thing. It's the anything illuminated in there. There are, shadows and highlights within this image right here, but, the lighting would be defined by the area that isn't toned in. Same thing for anything like a mountain. Now that's easy for people to understand, that are new to scenic stamping. Here's a scene of a little chapel or something like that. But when it came to the usage of sky and the negative space, like light sources, or things like, this is a recent scene stamped in one of the lessons, the stars in the sky, like something like that, the question would often be, how did you get those stars to be light? They thought it was some sort of positive addition to the piece of paper in terms of stamping something light into it, like a stamp that would be light, and they would stamp it and you'd be left with those illuminated stars, but it's more a matter of toning it around it. Now, I mean, if you know any of these, if you're a scenic stamper and been doing this is, really basic stuff here, but it is, a different concept in many ways to a lot of different forms of stamping before you get to something like this. I mean, something like this with the lights illuminated like that, when you see a finished scene with all this tone around it, if someone's new to stamping, they might think that you used, I don't know, some sort of resist, or maybe you bleached out some colors in there or something like that, and it removed color, as opposed to just not toning in certain areas with your darker tones, okay? And that got especially true with things like sky figures. Now let's stamp a couple things out. I'm just going to do this in black ink, just for the sake of speed, okay? Now, there's many ways to approach scenic stamping. You can stamp out your entire composition first and then add in some tone. But if you've watched any videos like that, you've seen where I've stamped in a lot of the background first, and then I've added things like those silhouettes of some trees later, okay? Just right over the top of it. Same thing with this one. I added in the tone first, and then I added that tree later, but I had to stamp this Bayou house first, just so that I knew where exactly those windows were, so that I didn't have to apply any tone to it to make it look like they were illuminated, okay? So, with just a little bit of kind of planning, you know, you can approach your scenes in a very strategic way as far as your light sources and reflected light might be defined, if that makes any sense. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean here. I'll try to explain. And again, this is just some basic concepts here for those kind of new to scenic stamping any type of kind of full sky imagery where you have, you know, illuminated sources within a given space. Okay. And I'll tell you about, you know, some of the things that people have asked me before. Okay, so this is just your Cloud with Moon Large above the chapel stamp here. Now I'm going to get a lot of smearing as I apply some tone into it, because this is wet still with ink, but it's the concept here. I'm not trying to go for some kind of real polished, finished scene right here. So anyways, if I have this composition in here, and let's say I want that moon to be my light source, then I would be adding in some tone around it, okay? So just applying some tone. If this was done on matte paper as opposed to glossy, then what I could use is I can tone in with colored pencil, chalks, pastels, any type of media, okay? Soft media. This happens to be on glossy cardstock, so I'm just applying some dye-based inks. You can stipple brush your dye-based inks into it. You can use all kinds of different techniques with this, okay? So anyways, what we're doing is we're defining that light source in there by adding some tone around it, okay? So it could be a sun. I wouldn't use black on it, maybe. Well, you could, if you want to go for a kind of a monochromatic black and white type of look. You can do that. But you can see this is in one of those instances where you kind of have to stamp out your composition in order to define your light and your reflected light, if you have those types of that type of imagery within a given scene. Okay, let's do something else here. All right, let's take a look at this mountain stamp here. And again, I'll just kind of render this in black and white. I'm getting crumbs off of my stamp pad. I need to switch my black pad to something else. Okay, let's do it this way. Let's go horizontal with this. Okay. If you've watched the video on the ledge stamp or boulders with lichen, you've seen how those can stack. That's the same type of thing with this mountain here. If you want to create kind of a larger mountainscape, you can just stack them like so if you want to, you know, and just build them up however high you want them to go. I mean, you could do a little meta masking on here if you wanted to, but you don't really have to, okay? So we have a mountain range right there, kind of your Rocky Mountains type of granite type of structuring. But let's say, okay, I wanted to just define some lights and shadows within this area, okay? I'm going to apply some tone, okay, onto some of these mountains. I'm really getting smudgy because I'm getting it all over my fingers here, and I'm kind of printing it up here in the sky as well. But let's just apply some tone here into these mounted. Now this would be an instance where, you know, if you want certain peaks to kind of, you know, stand out, like they're capturing some of that light, reflecting some of that light, then you have to stamp it out first so that you can avoid some of these peaks within there, okay? As opposed to just kind of doing a whole background first and stamping the mountains over it, okay? Now let's apply some of this tone into the sky. And now, normally I would be doing this with some lighter tones of ink and working into my darker ones, but I just want to move this along quickly so you can kind of see the concept that I'm kind of talking about in this video. Because this question does come up, or it has come up a lot when I was doing workshops or something like that. And I'll get to that in just a minute here, okay? So let's say I'm getting some tone in here, okay? Like so, working around that, those peaks. Okay. Some of those peaks are kind of standing out a little bit more because I've made the area around them darker. And that's no different than like something like a star. If you want to make those stars stand out lighter by contrast, then you have to take the area around it a little bit darker, okay? Same type of thing. We're just working with contrast, you know, on this type of artwork. We don't have lights, you know, kind of LEDs or something like that built into the paper in the back, illuminating the scene. Okay, so what we have to use, our tool for that then, is contrast. So, however, you know, however bright, light, and illuminated you want certain things to stand, you know, to be, you can make the area around it darker. Okay, but now here's the thing that comes up. Okay, sometimes people, you know, if they're stamping out their first scene or something like that sort, they might get to this point in a scene and think, all right, I want something else in the sky. They might be thinking, so, oh, how about this moon or this lightning, okay? But they're thinking that if they stamp out this lightning, it is going to be light in there and it's going to stand out, but it really isn't, because the negative space in here, which will not be stamped out, is going to be the, you know, the color of whatever's behind there already, okay? So that's why you would have to stamp out something like this first, you know, before you get into it. Something like this too, that you're thinking, okay, this moon, I want this nice bright moon because here it is in this image. So they feel that if they stamp it out down here, it's going to be, you know, something like this, right? Nice and bright. But in this case, it's not. Now I've left a little bit of the area light like that, okay? But it's not going to be white. In other words, it might look okay though. Let's stamp it over here, just to make a point, okay? Okay, so what we have is this moon. It looks pretty cool though, doesn't it? But it has all of those streaks of color underneath it. Well, in this case it's just black. But it is that finish on there because the streaks were already in the paper. Actually, I like that one kind of almost better than this one. Looks too stark, but you wouldn't always be doing this in black and white. You would have other colors in here. Blue moon or something like that. So anyways, I mean, you could do something like that and then you can just go back in here and just kind of blend this in a little bit more. But just, you know, as far as my point goes in this, for this video, those images, be it a sky figure or a land figure or anything like that, all right, that you might stamp in here, anything that's light on a design, anything in the background that's already been pre-stamped or toned in is going to be in these different areas. So that's why I would do, I wouldn't stamp something like this image with the chapel. I don't think, if you've seen this video, I just did the whole background. These trees weren't in it. I just saved that till the end. But I wouldn't necessarily stamp this right into the scene, right? Because it's not going to be light like that. You're going to have all those stars and clouds and everything in the background showing right up in the middle of this, okay? So that's why you just do things. That's, it's kind of about negative space. Now, the things that you can stamp, like in the very end, that are very effective is in terms of a last image, kind of a finishing touch in terms of the composition of imagery goes, are solid images like this branch here or these reeds down here. I stamped those cypress knees last, but there is some open area in them, but for the most part I was just stamping them in these dark areas, and I just wanted it to be more of a silhouette. But I did have to stamp this first because I had to work that tone around those windows right there, those two very specific areas, and also those the reflection of that illumination within the water. So silhouette imagery, fine at the very end, but as far as images to be illuminated, or as the light sources themselves have to be stamped first so you can tone in around it. But anyways, I hope that all makes sense. Sometimes, like I said, when someone's new to it, if they wanted some lightning in the background here, I might be in a workshop or something like that, and they say, yeah, maybe I want, some lightning in the background. I'm going to stamp it right here. But I just have to kind of remind them, hey, lightning's not going to show up like that, because this area in the background is dark. And the reason why that's light is because you'd be stamping it on a white piece of paper. So I'd usually say, I don't know about doing that. If you wanted that in there, what you want to do is you want to stamp that first and then work your tone around it so you can avoid those types of bolts within that image. It always happens, with moons and suns or something like that. Something that people might want as a light source. Just kind of doing that first, and that's kind of the concept of the negative space types of sky imagery, especially. Okay, so anyways, I hope that kind of makes sense. For all you who might be new to scenic stamping and kind of this type of, landscape stamping where you might be defining kind of light sources within your given scene or spaces. Okay? Thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed it.